I'll bet my life for her. Mountain Man plays deadly card game against cruel sheriff to save obese girl. The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and coming snow through the streets of Broken Ridge, a town that had grown mean under Sheriff Clayton Murdoch's iron rule. The year was 1867, and the Montana Territory still remembered the gold rush days, though most of the color had been panned from the streams years ago. What remained was a collection of weathered buildings, desperate people, and one man who controlled them all with fear and a fast gun. Eliza May Thornton stood in the general store, her cheeks burning with shame as Sheriff Murdoch's deputy, a weasel-faced man named Pike, counted out coins with deliberate slowness. At 19 years old and weighing near 300 pounds, Eliza had learned to make herself small despite her size, to avoid the eyes that judged and the mouths that whispered. "That'll be $2.40, Pike said, his lips curling into a sneer. "Though I reckon the store might go broke feeding you, Miss Thornton." The other customers laughed, and Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. She reached for her reticule with trembling fingers, but before she could retrieve her money, a deep voice cut through the cruel laughter like a blade through smoke. "The lady's purchases are paid for." Every head turned toward the doorway, where a mountain of a man stood silhouetted against the afternoon sun. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to fill the frame. His buckskin jacket was worn but clean, and a thick beard covered his weathered face. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, pale blue and steady as a winter's sky, holding a quiet danger that made Pike take a step backward. "Who the hell are you?" Pike demanded, his hand moving toward his pistol. The stranger moved with surprising grace for such a large man, crossing the distance between them in 3 long strides. He placed a gold eagle on the counter with a solid clink. "Name's Jeremiah Stone. Been trapping up in the high country these past 5 years. And I don't take kindly to men who mock women in my presence." Pike's face flushed red. "You best watch your mouth, stranger. Sheriff Murdoch don't—" "I don't give a damn what Sheriff Murdoch don't," Jeremiah interrupted, his voice low and dangerous. "Now, you gonna finish this lady's transaction, or do I need to discuss manners with you outside?" The deputy's hand moved away from his gun. He knew a genuine threat when he saw one, and this mountain man had the look of someone who'd survived things that would kill softer men. Pike grabbed the gold coin and hastily wrapped Eliza's supplies. Jeremiah turned to Eliza, his hard expression softening. "My apologies for the rough language, ma'am. No one should be treated with such disrespect." Eliza found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Thank you, sir. I can pay you back." "No need," Jeremiah said, tipping his hat. "Consider it a gift from one stranger to another." As Eliza gathered her packages, she felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest, not just gratitude, but a spark of hope that perhaps the world held more kindness than she'd been led to believe. That evening, Jeremiah took a room at the only boarding house in town, run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher. Over a supper of venison stew, he learned more about Broken Ridge and its cruel sheriff. "Clayton Murdoch came here 3 years ago," Mrs. Fletcher explained, her voice low. "Claimed he was bringing law and order, but what he brought was tyranny. He's got half the town paying protection money, and those who don't, well, bad things happen to them." "And the territorial marshal?" Jeremiah asked. Mrs. Fletcher shook her head. 3 days ride away, and by the time he gets here, Murdoch's always got his story straight. No witnesses ever come forward. They're too scared." "What about the Thornton girl I met today?" The widow's expression grew sad. "Poor Eliza. Her father owned the best ranch in the valley, but he died last winter." "Heart gave out," the doctor said, though some whisper Murdoch had a hand in it. "The ranch passed to Eliza, and Murdoch's been trying to force her to sell it to him for a fraction of its worth. He's been making her life miserable, hoping to break her spirit." Jeremiah's jaw tightened. "And folks just let it happen? What choice do we have? Murdoch's got 6 deputies, all faster with a gun than anyone in town. He's killed 4 men in fair fight since he got here. We're farmers and shopkeepers, Mr. Stone, not gunfighters." That night, Jeremiah couldn't sleep. He'd come to Broken Ridge to resupply before heading back to his cabin in the mountains, seeking solitude and peace after years of violence and loss. But something about Eliza's tear-filled eyes and the town's collective fear stirred old instincts he'd thought he'd buried. The next morning, Jeremiah found Eliza at her father's ranch, struggling to repair a broken fence post. The property was beautiful, rolling pastures bordered by pine forests, with the Rockies rising majestically in the distance. But neglect showed everywhere. The barn needed paint, the fences sagged, and the main house looked lonely and sad. "Morning, Miss Thornton," Jeremiah called out, approaching slowly so as not to startle her. Eliza looked up, and her face showed surprise mixed with something that might have been pleasure. "Mr. Stone, I didn't expect to see you again." "Jeremiah, please. I was hoping I might help you with these repairs. I've got strong hands and nothing pressing to attend to." Eliza's eyes welled up, but she blinked the tears away. "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask for pay," Jeremiah replied, already rolling up his sleeves. "Just seems a shame to see good land going to ruin when there's someone willing to help." For the next 3 days, Jeremiah worked on the ranch from sunup to sundown. He fixed fences, patched the barn roof, and even helped Eliza with the dozen head of cattle she'd managed to hold on to. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch, and slowly, Eliza began to talk. She told him about her father, a kind man who'd never made her feel ashamed of her size. She spoke of her mother, who died when Eliza was young, and how food had become both comfort and curse. She described the years of mockery, the loneliness and the fear that had become her constant companion since Murdoch set his sights on her land. "He sends his deputies by every week," she said one evening, her voice hollow. "They make threats, break things, kill my chickens. Last month they ran off most of my cattle. He says he'll give me 1 more week to accept his offer, and then—" She didn't finish the sentence. Jeremiah listened, his expression unreadable, but inside a cold fury was building. He'd known men like Murdoch before, men who took pleasure in crushing those weaker than themselves. "When's this week up?" he asked quietly. "Tomorrow night. He's demanded I come to the saloon to sign the papers. Says if I don't, he'll burn the ranch and charge me with cattle theft." Her voice broke. "I have nowhere to go, Jeremiah. This ranch is all I have left of my father." That night, Jeremiah walked into town and found Sheriff Murdoch holding court in the saloon, surrounded by his deputies and sycophants. The sheriff was a handsome man, tall and well-dressed, with dark hair slicked back and a silver star pinned to his vest. His good looks made his cruelty all the more shocking. "Well, well," Murdoch drawled as Jeremiah approached. "The mountain man who thinks he can play hero. I've been hearing about you, Stone. Heard you've been sniffing around that fat girl's ranch." The saloon went quiet. Jeremiah kept his expression neutral, though his hands clenched at his sides. "I've been helping a neighbor. Nothing wrong with that." Murdoch laughed, a sound without warmth. "Neighbor, you planning on staying in Broken Ridge? Because it seems to me you're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." "Seems to me a man forcing a young woman to sell her property is the one with his nose out of joint," Jeremiah replied evenly. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Careful, mountain man. Men have died for less than what you just said." "I don't die easy." Murdoch stood, his hand resting on his pistol. "That a challenge?" Jeremiah shook his head slowly. "I'm not a fool, Sheriff. You've got 6 guns backing you, and you're known for being fast on the draw. Wouldn't be much of a fair fight." "Then what do you want?" "I want to make you a wager," Jeremiah said, and the saloon seemed to hold its breath. "You're a gambling man, I hear. Play poker most nights. How about we settle this over cards?" Murdoch's interest was piqued. "What kind of wager?" "A single hand of 5-card draw. High stakes. If I win, you leave Miss Thornton and her ranch alone. Forever. You tear up whatever false papers you've got claiming she owes you money, and you ride out of her life. And if I win? Jeremiah's voice was steady as stone. If you win, I'll bet my life. You can shoot me dead right here, and no one will say a word against it. Self-defense, they'll call it. One less troublemaker in your town. The saloon erupted in murmurs. Murdoch stared at Jeremiah, searching for any sign of deception or fear. He found neither. "You'd bet your life for that fat girl?" Murdoch asked, disbelief in his voice. "I'll bet my life for her," Jeremiah confirmed. "One hand, winner takes all." Murdoch's eyes gleamed with cruel delight. The sheriff was known as one of the best poker players in the territory, and he'd never lost when the stakes truly mattered. "You're a fool, Stone, but I accept your wager. Tomorrow night, here in the saloon, 8 o'clock, the whole town can watch." Jeremiah nodded and turned to leave, but Murdoch's voice stopped him. "Tell me something, Mountain Man. Why? Why would you risk your life for a woman you barely know? A woman who's so fat she can barely fit through a door?" Jeremiah turned back, and his eyes held a depth of sadness that made even Murdoch pause. "Because once, a long time ago, I was cruel to someone who didn't deserve it, someone I loved. She died before I could make it right. I won't make that mistake twice." He walked out into the night, leaving the saloon buzzing with speculation and disbelief. Word of the wager spread through Broken Ridge like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone knew that the Mountain Man was gambling his life for Eliza Thornton's freedom. The reactions were mixed. Some called him noble, others called him a fool, and a few whispered that perhaps he saw something in Eliza that others had missed. Eliza herself didn't learn of the wager until mid-morning when Mrs. Fletcher came to the ranch, tears streaming down her face. "He can't do this," Eliza sobbed after hearing the news. "I won't let him die for me. I'll sign Murdoch's papers. I'll give him the ranch." "It's too late for that now," Mrs. Fletcher said gently. "The wager's been made. If Jeremiah backs out, Murdoch will kill him anyway for making him look foolish. And then he'll still take your ranch." Eliza found Jeremiah in the barn, working on repairing a stall. "How could you?" she demanded, her voice shaking with anger and fear. "How could you bet your life for me? You don't even know me." Jeremiah set down his hammer and faced her. "Maybe not, but I know enough. I know you've been dealt a harder hand than most, and you've faced it with more courage than men twice your size. I know you've got a good heart and a strong spirit, even if the world's tried to beat it out of you. And I know that sometimes the right thing to do is stand up for someone, even if it costs you everything." "But why me?" Eliza's voice broke. "I'm nothing special. I'm fat and ugly and—" "Stop," Jeremiah interrupted firmly. "Don't you dare repeat the lies that cruel people have told you. You're not what they say you are. You're a woman who's survived, who's held on to her father's dream when lesser people would have given up. That takes strength. That takes beauty of a kind that doesn't fade with age or change with the seasons." Eliza stared at him, and for the first time in years she saw herself reflected in someone's eyes, not as an object of mockery, but as a human being worthy of respect and protection. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I," Jeremiah admitted. "But sometimes being scared and doing the thing anyway is the definition of courage." That evening, the entire town of Broken Ridge crowded into the saloon. Every chair was taken, every inch of standing room occupied. This was more than a card game. It was a referendum on Murdoch's rule, a test of whether one man's courage could stand against tyranny. Sheriff Murdoch sat at a table in the center of the room, looking confident and relaxed. His deputies stood nearby, hands near their weapons, ready to ensure the game proceeded as planned. Jeremiah entered at precisely 8 o'clock, and the crowd parted to let him through. Eliza stood near the door with Mrs. Fletcher, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Jeremiah caught her eye and nodded once, a simple gesture that somehow steadied her racing heart. "Let's get this over with," Murdoch said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "I've got better things to do than waste time on dead men." A local businessman named Harris, one of the few men in town Murdoch hadn't completely corrupted, was chosen to deal. He shuffled the deck nervously, his hands shaking slightly. "Rules are simple," Harris announced to the crowd. "One hand of 5-card draw. High hand wins. No buy-ins, no second chances. The cards will decide." He dealt 5 cards to each man. The saloon was so quiet you could hear the whisper of paper as the cards slid across the felt. Jeremiah picked up his cards slowly, his face betraying nothing. He held 3 of diamonds, 7 of clubs, Jack of hearts, Queen of spades, and King of diamonds. Nothing, not even a pair. The worst possible hand to start with when your life was on the line. Murdoch, meanwhile, allowed himself a small smile as he examined his cards. He had 2 pairs, 10s and 3s, a strong starting hand. "Dealer asks, how many cards?" Harris said. Murdoch discarded 1 card, drawing to improve his 2 pairs. "1 card," he said confidently. All eyes turned to Jeremiah. This was the moment of truth. A smart player would discard all 5 cards and pray for something better. But Jeremiah surprised everyone. "I'll play these," he said calmly, not taking any new cards. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Murdoch's eyebrows rose in surprise, then his smile widened. "You're bluffing. You've got nothing, and you're hoping I'll fold." "I don't need you to fold," Jeremiah replied. "I just need my cards to beat yours." Murdoch drew his replacement card, and his smile grew even wider. He'd completed a full house, 10s over 3s. It was an almost unbeatable hand in a single-draw game. "Let's see what you got, Mountain Man," Murdoch said, laying down his cards with a flourish. "Full house, 10s over 3s, beat that." The crowd leaned forward. Eliza's eyes closed, unable to watch. This was it. This was where Jeremiah would die. But Jeremiah didn't move to lay down his cards. Instead, he looked directly at Murdoch and said quietly, "Before I show my hand, I want to make something clear to everyone here. This game was about more than one man's life or one woman's ranch. It was about standing up to bullies, about saying that fear won't rule us anymore." "Enough philosophy," Murdoch snapped, his hand moving toward his gun. "Show your cards or admit you've lost." Jeremiah reached for his cards, and in that moment, time seemed to slow. He flipped them over one by one. 3 of diamonds, 7 of clubs, Jack of hearts, Queen of spades, King of diamonds. "Nothing," Murdoch crowed. "You've got absolutely nothing. You bet your life on garbage cards." He stood, drawing his pistol. "You're a dead man, Stone." But Harris, the dealer, was staring at Jeremiah's cards with wide eyes. "Wait," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Wait a moment." Everyone looked at him. Harris pointed at the cards with a shaking finger. "Look at the suits. 3 of diamonds, 7 of clubs, Jack of hearts, Queen of spades, King of diamonds. None of them match. It's not a flush. It's not a straight. It's not a pair. It's—" He paused, his voice gaining strength. "It's the rarest hand in poker when played by these specific rules." "What are you talking about?" Murdoch demanded. "It's called a mountain hand," Harris said, and suddenly his voice was clear and certain. "In the old trapper games up in the high country, if you were dealt a hand with no pairs, no matching suits, and all different values spread across the range, it was considered blessed by the mountain spirits. It beats everything, even a royal flush." The crowd erupted in confusion and argument. Murdoch's face turned purple with rage. "That's not a real rule. That's just mountain man superstition." But an old prospector named Dutch stepped forward from the crowd. "It's real enough. I played in those games 40 years ago. Mountain hand beats all. It's the rule because the odds of being dealt it naturally are so rare, the old-timers considered it divine intervention." "I don't accept this," Murdoch shouted, his gun now pointing directly at Jeremiah's heart. "This is cheating." Jeremiah stood slowly, his hands away from his sides. You accepted the wager, Sheriff. A single hand of 5-card draw. High hand wins. Everyone here heard it. Are you going to go back on your word in front of the whole town? For a long moment, Murdoch stood frozen, his face a mask of fury. His deputies watched him, waiting for orders. The crowd held its collective breath. Then Dutch spoke again, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. If you shoot an unarmed man who won fair and square, Sheriff, you won't be able to call it self-defense. We all saw it. The territorial marshal would have to act, and all your protection money won't save you from a hanging. Other voices joined in, emboldened by Dutch's courage. The mountain man won fair. Honor the wager. Let him go. Murdoch's gun hand trembled with rage, but slowly, reluctantly, he lowered the weapon. He'd built his power on a facade of legitimacy, of being the lawman who kept order. If he murdered Jeremiah now, that facade would crumble, and the town might finally find the courage to stand against him. This isn't over, Murdoch hissed. Get out of my town, both of you, and if I ever see either of you again— You'll leave Miss Thornton and her ranch alone, Jeremiah interrupted, his voice hard as iron. That was the wager. Or do you want everyone here to know that Sheriff Clayton Murdoch is a man who doesn't keep his word? Murdoch's jaw clenched so hard it looked like his teeth might crack. Fine, he spat. The girl keeps her ranch, but you— He jabbed a finger at Jeremiah. You leave, tonight. Jeremiah shook his head. I'll leave when I'm good and ready. The wager said nothing about me leaving town. Just that you'd leave Miss Thornton alone. The two men stared at each other, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Finally, Murdoch turned away, shoving through the crowd and out into the night, his deputies trailing behind him like whipped dogs. The saloon erupted in celebration. Men clapped Jeremiah on the back, women wept with relief, and for a moment, Broken Ridge felt like a town that had remembered what hope tasted like. But Jeremiah's eyes found Eliza's across the crowded room, and he saw not just gratitude there, but something deeper, something that made his heart beat faster for reasons that had nothing to do with the danger he'd just faced. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Jeremiah stayed on at Eliza's ranch, and together they worked to restore it to its former glory. But more than that, they talked. Long conversations on the porch as the sun set, quiet exchanges over morning coffee, shared laughter at small jokes, and gentle moments of understanding. Eliza found herself opening up in ways she never had before, sharing dreams she'd thought long dead. She wanted to breed horses, she confessed one evening. Her father had started with 2 good mares, and she believed she could build a reputation for quality stock if given the chance. Jeremiah listened, encouraged, and shared his own dreams of a life less solitary, of a home that meant more than just shelter from the cold. Why did you really do it? Eliza asked one night, the question that had been burning in her since the card game. Why risk your life for me? Jeremiah was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the mountains silhouetted against the stars. I told you about someone I hurt once. That was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. He turned to face her, and in the lamplight, Eliza saw vulnerability in those steady blue eyes. Her name was Sarah. We were engaged. I was young and stupid, and I thought the things that mattered were what other people thought. Sarah was— She was like you, beautiful in ways that shallow people couldn't see, but I let others' opinions poison me. I said cruel things, broke her heart. A month later, she died from fever, and I never got to tell her I was sorry, that I was wrong, that she was everything good in the world, and I'd been too blind to see it. His voice grew rough with emotion. I spent 5 years in the mountains, running from that guilt, punishing myself by being alone. And then I saw you in that store, saw the same look in your eyes that Sarah had the day I broke her heart, and I knew. I'd been given a second chance, not to save Sarah, but to save someone else, to finally do the right thing. Eliza reached out and took his hand, her own trembling slightly. You saved more than my ranch, Jeremiah. You saved me from believing all the lies I'd been told about myself." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, while the stars wheeled overhead, and something new and precious took root between them. But peace in Broken Ridge was fragile. 3 days later, Jeremiah rode into town for supplies and found Murdoch waiting for him outside the general store. "I honored the wager," the sheriff said, his voice cold. "The girl keeps her ranch. But you've made a fool of me, Stone. Made people think they can stand up to me. That can't continue." "What people choose to do isn't my concern," Jeremiah replied calmly. "I kept my end of the bargain. Now we're done." Murdoch's hand moved toward his gun. "We're done when I say we're done." But before violence could erupt, Eliza appeared on the boardwalk, and with her were Mrs. Fletcher, Dutch, Harris, and a dozen other townspeople. "Sheriff!" Eliza called out, her voice stronger than Jeremiah had ever heard it. "If you draw on Jeremiah, you'll have to answer to all of us. We're done being afraid." Murdoch looked at the gathered crowd and saw something he hadn't seen in 3 years. Defiance. Real defiance. Not just one mountain man's courage, but a town that had finally remembered its own strength. "This isn't over," Murdoch said, but his words lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," Dutch said firmly. "We've sent for the territorial marshal. Told him everything. He'll be here within the week. You can stay and face real justice, or you can ride out now while you still can." For a long moment, Murdoch stood frozen, calculating odds and outcomes. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the stable. Within an hour, he and his deputies had ridden out of Broken Ridge, and the town began to breathe freely for the first time in years. Autumn turned to winter, and winter to spring. Jeremiah stayed on at Eliza's ranch, and no one questioned why. The work they'd done together had transformed the property. The fences were strong, the barn was painted, and a new herd of cattle grazed in the pastures. But more than that, Eliza had transformed. It wasn't that she'd lost weight, though hard work and happiness had made her stronger and healthier. It was that she carried herself differently now, with confidence, with pride, with the knowledge that she was valued not despite who she was, but because of it. One evening in May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Jeremiah cleared his throat nervously. "Eliza, I've been thinking. This ranch needs a lot of work, and one person can't do it all alone. Might be you could use a partner, someone who knows horses and cattle, who doesn't mind hard work, and who—" He paused, suddenly uncertain. "Who thinks you're the finest woman he's ever known." Eliza's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm asking if you'd consider letting me stay, permanently, as your husband, if you'll have me. I know I'm no prize, I'm older than you, rough around the edges, and I've got more past than future. But I promise you this. I'll spend every day of my life making sure you know how precious you are." Tears streamed down Eliza's face, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Jeremiah Stone, I'll marry you." They were wed in June, in a ceremony attended by the entire town of Broken Ridge. Mrs. Fletcher wept happy tears. Dutch made a toast that was equal parts touching and profane. And Harris, the card dealer who'd recognized the mountain hand, gave them a set of fine china as a wedding gift. As Jeremiah and Eliza stood together under the Montana sky, surrounded by friends who'd become family, they knew their story had been unusual. A mountain man and a woman the world had tried to diminish, brought together by a desperate gamble and the courage to stand against cruelty. But love, as Jeremiah often said in the years to come, didn't need to make sense to anyone but the two people living it. And their love made perfect sense. Two souls who'd each been lost finding home in one another. The ranch prospered over the years. Eliza's horse breeding program became renowned throughout the territory, and Jeremiah's reputation as a fair and honest man brought business from far and wide. They never got rich, but they had something better. A life built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and the kind of love that deepens with time rather than fading. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, they'd sit on their porch and tell their children and grandchildren about the night a mountain man bet his life on a card game, and how one improbable hand, a mountain hand, changed everything. The children would listen with wide eyes, hardly believing such a story could be true. But every word of it. Because some have to risk everything for what's right, conspire to help you win. Magic that never fades, no matter how many times the story is told.